My brother Marcus robbed $1.5 million from our family business, and what we did to him in return will haunt me for the rest of my life. I'm telling this story not because I'm proud of what happened, but because the weight of it has been crushing my chest for 3 years now, and I need to get it out before it kills me. My name is David Chen, and until everything fell apart, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought blood was thicker than water, that loyalty ran deeper than greed, and that some bonds could never be broken. I was wrong about all of it. The Chen family business started with my grandfather in 1967. He came to America with nothing but calloused hands and a dream that his children would never know the hunger he'd known in rural Taiwan. He bought a small electronics repair shop in San Francisco's Richmond district with borrowed money and 16-hour workdays. By the time my father took over in the early 90s, we had 3 locations and were importing components directly from Asia. When Dad suffered his first heart attack in 2018, Marcus and I stepped up to run Chen Electronics together. We were supposed to be partners, equal shares, equal responsibility. Marcus handled the financial side while I managed operations and logistics. It made sense. He had the business degree from Berkeley, the charm that could sweet-talk suppliers and customers alike. I was better with the nuts and bolts, the inventory management, the day-to-day grind that kept the lights on. For 2 years it worked. Our revenues grew by 30%. We opened a 4th location in Oakland. Dad, recovering at home but still sharp as ever, would smile when he reviewed our monthly reports. "You boys are doing something I never could," he'd say in his accented English. "You're thinking big." Marcus was thinking big, all right, just not the way any of us imagined. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in March 2021. I was at our main warehouse in South San Francisco, checking on a delayed shipment of microprocessors from Shenzhen when our accountant Sarah called. Her voice had a tremor I'd never heard before. "David, I need you to come to the office, right now." "What's wrong? Is it Dad?" "Just please come. Don't bring Marcus." The drive from the warehouse to our main office usually took 20 minutes, but I made it in 12, running 2 red lights and white-knuckling the steering wheel the entire way. Sarah was waiting for me in the conference room, surrounded by printouts and ledgers that looked like they'd been through a paper shredder and hastily taped back together. "Sit down," she said. I didn't want to sit down. I wanted her to tell me that whatever was wrong could be fixed, that it was just a paperwork error or a computer glitch. But the look on her face told me this was bigger than any glitch. "I've been going through the books for our quarterly tax preparation," she began, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly as she sorted through the papers. "There are some discrepancies I can't explain." Discrepancies. Such a clinical word for what she was about to show me. The money had been disappearing slowly at first, then in larger chunks over the past 8 months. Fake purchase orders for non-existent inventory. Payments to shell companies that existed only on paper. Wire transfers to offshore accounts disguised as legitimate business expenses. The sophistication of it was what struck me first. This wasn't some desperate grab for quick cash. This was methodical, planned, executed by someone who knew our systems inside and out, someone who had access to everything. "How much?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would change everything. Sarah's fingers drummed against the table. 1.5 million, maybe more. Some of the transactions go back further than I initially thought. The room started spinning. $1.5 million. More money than my grandfather had seen in his entire lifetime. More than enough to destroy everything 3 generations of Chen men had built. "There's only one person who could have done this," Sarah said quietly. "Only one person with this level of access to the accounts." We both knew she was talking about Marcus. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to grab those papers and tear them up, to scream that she was wrong, that my brother, my younger brother who I'd taught to ride a bike, who'd been my best man at my wedding, who still called me Big Brother, even though we were both grown men with families of our own, would never betray us like this. But the evidence was there in black and white, transaction after transaction, each one bearing Marcus's digital signature. "What do we do?" I asked. Sarah gathered the papers into a neat stack. "We call the police, we file charges, we try to recover what we can through the courts." But I couldn't call the police. Not yet. Not without talking to Marcus first, without giving him a chance to explain. Maybe there was a reason, some desperate situation I didn't know about. Maybe he'd planned to pay it all back. Maybe. Maybe I was just a fool who couldn't accept that the person I trusted most in the world had been lying to my face for months. I found Marcus at the Oakland location that afternoon, chatting with Mrs. Kim about her daughter's upcoming wedding while she browsed our selection of digital cameras. He looked so normal, so much like the brother I'd known my entire life, that for a moment I convinced myself Sarah had made a mistake. This was Marcus, the kid who'd shared his lunch money with classmates who forgot theirs, who'd worked summers in Grandpa's original shop without complaint, who'd cried harder than anyone at Grandpa's funeral. But when Mrs. Kim left and we were alone, something in his expression shifted. A wariness crept into his eyes, like he'd been expecting this conversation. "We need to talk," I said. "About what?" "You know about what?" The color drained from his face, but he didn't deny it. That's when I knew for certain that Sarah was right. We drove to Baker Beach in silence, the same place we used to come as kids when we needed to escape the cramped apartment above Grandpa's shop. The Golden Gate Bridge stretched across the bay, and I remembered how Marcus used to say he'd drive across it someday in a Ferrari, successful and rich and free from the smell of solder and the sound of cash registers. "How long have you known?" he asked when we finally stopped walking. "Since this morning. Sarah found it during the quarterly review." He nodded, like he'd been expecting this too. "I was going to pay it back." $1.5 million, Marcus. How exactly were you planning to pay back $1.5 million? He kicked at the sand, avoiding my eyes. I had investments, cryptocurrency mostly. It was supposed to be a sure thing. Double, triple returns. I was going to put everything back plus extra and no one would have ever known. Cryptocurrency. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You gambled our family's livelihood on cryptocurrency? It wasn't gambling. I had inside information connections. This guy I met through college, he had a system. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop. Do you hear yourself right now? You sound like every other addict who ever lost everything chasing the next big score. That's when. He got angry. His face flushed red, and suddenly he was the little brother I remembered from childhood arguments, defensive and righteous and convinced he was smarter than everyone else. You don't understand, he said. You never understood. Dad always liked you better, trusted you more. You got to be the responsible one while I was just there, the backup plan. That's not true, and you know it. Isn't it? When Dad had his heart attack, who did he ask for first? When we restructured the business, whose ideas did he always prefer? You think I didn't notice how you two would have your little conversations in Mandarin, like I wasn't smart enough to understand what you were saying? The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth in it. Dad and I had always connected over the technical side of the business, the problem-solving and strategic thinking. Marcus was the people person, the one who could charm a sale out of the most reluctant customer. But Dad came from an old-school mentality where the eldest son naturally inherited the mantle of responsibility. But that didn't justify what he'd done. That didn't excuse stealing from the family that had given him everything. So you decided to prove how smart you are by stealing from us? I decided to prove I could make this business bigger than you ever imagined. If my investments had paid off, we'd be millionaires right now. All of us. And if they didn't pay off, which they obviously didn't since we're having this conversation. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the water. A container ship was making its way toward the bay, loaded with cargo that would soon stock shelves across America. I thought about all the shipments we'd received over the years, all the legitimate business we'd built through hard work and honest dealing. I lost it all, he finally admitted. Every penny. The cryptocurrency market crashed, and the guy with the inside information disappeared. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late to get anything back. When? 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks. He'd been coming to work every day for 3 weeks, looking me in the eye, shaking hands with customers, pretending everything was fine, while knowing he'd destroyed everything our family had worked for. What happens now? He asked. I'd been dreading that question because I didn't have an answer. The rational part of my brain knew what Sarah had suggested. Call the police, file, charges. Let the legal system handle it. Marcus had committed a crime, multiple crimes, and the fact that he was my brother didn't change that. But the other part of my brain, the part that remembered teaching him to tie his shoes and helping him with his math homework, couldn't imagine watching him get handcuffed and led away in front of our parents. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time to think. David, please, I know I screwed up, but I'm your brother. We can figure this out together. Maybe take out loans, restructure the business, something. Anything but involving the police. The desperation in his voice broke something inside me. This was still Marcus. Still my little brother, even if he'd betrayed everything we stood for. I need to talk to Mom and Dad first, I said. They have a right to know. His face went white. You can't tell them. It'll kill Dad. He's still recovering from the heart attack. And if he finds out about this, he's going to find out anyway. The money's gone, Marcus. We can't just pretend it never happened. Give me 6 months. Let me try to find another way to pay it back. I'll mortgage my house, sell everything I own. Just don't tell them yet. But I was already walking back to the car. I'd heard enough lies for one day. The drive to my parents' house in the Sunset District felt like driving to a funeral. Mom was in her garden, tending to the vegetables she'd been growing since we were kids. Dad was in his recliner, reading the Chinese newspaper and occasionally glancing at the financial news on TV. They looked so peaceful, so secure in the knowledge that their sons were successfully carrying on the family legacy. I was about to shatter that security forever. David, Mom smiled when she saw me, wiping dirt from her hands on her apron. You're early for dinner. Is Marcus coming too? Actually, I need to talk to you and Dad about Marcus, about the business. Something in my tone must have warned her because her smile faded. What's wrong? Is someone hurt? No one's hurt, but we need to sit down. Dad muted the TV when we gathered in the living room. At 72, he was still sharp, still the man who'd built a business from nothing through sheer force of will. But the heart attack had aged him, made him seem smaller somehow, more fragile. There's no easy way to say this, I began. Marcus has been stealing money from the business. A lot of money. The silence that followed was the kind that feels solid, like you could reach out and touch it. Mom's hand went to her throat. Dad's face showed no expression at all, which somehow made it worse than if he'd started yelling. How much? He asked quietly. $1.5 million, Mom gasped. Dad closed his eyes. How long? Dad asked. Sarah thinks it started about 8 months ago. It got worse recently. Where's the money now? Gone. He lost it all in some cryptocurrency scheme. Dad opened his eyes and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something deeper and more painful. Resignation, maybe. The look of a man who'd lived long enough to watch his dreams crumble. What do you want to do? He asked. The question caught me off guard. I'd expected him to take charge, to tell me exactly how we were going to handle this crisis. But he was passing the decision to me, acknowledging that I was now the head of the family business, that this was my responsibility. I don't know, I admitted. Sarah says we should call the police. And what do you say? I looked around the living room, at the photos of 3 generations of Chen family milestones, at the certificates and awards Dad had earned over the decades, at the comfortable life that was now hanging by a thread. He's my brother, I said. Dad nodded slowly. Yes, he is. But he's also a thief who could destroy everything you and Grandpa built. Yes, he is that too. Mom had been quietly crying, but now she spoke up. There has to be another way, some way to fix this without destroying Marcus. Like what? I asked, perhaps more harshly than I'd intended. He stole $1.5 million, Mom. He gambled it away like it was his allowance. What kind of fix could possibly make that right? She didn't have an answer because there wasn't one. We all knew it. Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at the financial news on the muted TV. Finally, he spoke. In the old country, when I was a boy, there were traditional ways of handling family shame, ways of making things right without involving outsiders, without bringing dishonor to the family name in public. Dad, this isn't Taiwan in 1950. We can't just handle this with traditional justice. But even as I said it, I was curious what he meant. Dad rarely talked about his childhood, about the ways things were done before he came to America. Your grandfather, Dad continued, had a brother who stole from the family rice business. Not money, rice, bags and bags of rice that he sold to buy opium. When they caught him, the family gathered to decide his fate. What did they do? They stripped him of his name, his share in the business, his place at the family table. As far as the Chen family was concerned, he ceased to exist. He was forced to make his own way in the world, without family support, without the connections and reputation that came with the Chen name. That sounds like exile, I said. It was exile, but it was also mercy. They could have turned him over to the authorities, who would have executed him for stealing food during wartime. Instead, they gave him a chance to build a new life somewhere else, to start over with a clean slate. Mom looked horrified. "You can't be serious. Marcus is our son." "Marcus is a thief," Dad replied, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "The fact that he's our son makes it worse, not better. He didn't just steal money. He stole trust. He stole security. He stole the future we were building for his children and yours." "So what are you suggesting?" I asked. Dad looked at me directly. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just telling you how these things were handled in the past. The decision is yours to make." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through the options, each one worse than the last. If we called the police, Marcus would go to prison. Our family would be destroyed by scandal, and we'd still lose the money. If we did nothing, we'd have to close the business, lay off our employees, and live with the knowledge that crime had paid. But Dad's story about his uncle kept echoing in my mind. Exile. Cut off from the family, forced to make his own way in the world. It seemed medieval, cruel, impossibly harsh by modern standards. It also seemed like exactly what Marcus deserved. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called a family meeting for that evening. Myself, my wife Jennifer, Marcus and his wife Lisa, and our parents. I told everyone it was about the business situation, but I think they all knew what was really happening. We met at my parents' house, in the same living room where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where we'd announced pregnancies and promotions and all the milestones that families share. Now, it was going to be the site of something much darker. Marcus looked terrible. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes red-rimmed from what I assumed was a sleepless night. Lisa kept glancing at him with confusion and worry. He obviously hadn't told her about the theft yet. "Before we start," I said, "Lisa needs to know what's happened." "Know what?" she asked, looking around the room. "What's going on?" I looked at Marcus, giving him a chance to tell his own wife what he'd done, but he just stared at his hands, so I told her myself. Every detail, every transaction, every lie he'd told to cover his tracks. Lisa's reaction was immediate and visceral. She stood up so fast her chair fell backward, staring at Marcus like she'd never seen him before. $1.5 million? She whispered. "You stole $1.5 million from your own family?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Marcus said weakly. "I was going to pay it back." "With what money?" "We don't have that kind of money. Nobody has that kind of money just lying around." She turned to the rest of us. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I had no idea." "We believe you," Mom said gently. "This isn't your fault." But Lisa wasn't looking for absolution. She was looking at her husband like he was a stranger, and maybe he was. Maybe he'd been a stranger to all of us for months. "What happens now?" she asked. "That's what we're here to decide," I said. "We have several options, none of them good." I laid out the choices as clearly as I could. Criminal charges, which would mean prison time for Marcus, but probably no recovery of the stolen money. Civil action, which would take years and might not succeed. Or what? Lisa asked. I looked at Dad, who gave me the slightest nod. "Or we handle this as a family, permanently." I explained what Dad had told me about traditional justice, about exile and the loss of family name and connection. As I talked, I watched the faces around the room change from confusion to understanding to horror. "You're talking about disowning him," Jennifer said, "cutting him off completely." "I'm talking about consequences," I replied, "real consequences for what he's done." "But he's our son," Mom said, echoing her words from the night before. "And he's my brother," I said. "But he's also a thief who destroyed our family business. We can't just ignore that because we love him." Marcus finally spoke up. "What exactly are you proposing?" I'd spent all night thinking about the details, working out exactly how this would function in the modern world. "You would give up your share in the business, obviously. Your name would be removed from all company documents, all family accounts, everything. You'd have no claim to any Chen family assets now or in the future." "That's reasonable," he said quietly. "What else?" "You would leave San Francisco, leave California entirely. Move somewhere far enough away that our paths would never cross accidentally." Lisa's face went white. "Leave California? Our whole life is here. Our friends, my job, the kids' school." "The kids," Mom whispered. "What about Marcus's children?" That had been the hardest part to work out, the detail that had kept me up until dawn. Marcus had 2 kids, Amy, who was 8, and Kevin, who was 6. They were innocent in all this, but they were also his children, and any punishment of Marcus would inevitably affect them too. The children would be welcome at family gatherings, I said, birthdays, holidays, special occasions. But Marcus wouldn't be. And if Lisa chooses to divorce him over this, which would be completely understandable, she and the kids would always have a place in this family. Lisa started crying then, probably realizing for the first time that her marriage was over. No matter what we decided, even if we chose the gentlest possible option, how could she stay with a man who'd stolen from her children's grandparents? How long? Marcus asked. How long would this exile last? I'd been hoping he wouldn't ask that question because I didn't have a good answer. In the old country, according to Dad, exile was usually permanent. But this wasn't the old country, and complete permanence seemed impossibly cruel. 10 years, I said, picking a number that sounded appropriately severe. 10 years of complete separation from the family. After that, if you'd proven that you've changed, if you'd built a legitimate life somewhere else, we could consider reconciliation. And if I refuse? If I say this is medieval and insane and I won't go along with it? Then we call the police tomorrow morning and let the courts handle it. The room was silent except for Lisa's quiet sobbing and the ticking of the grandfather clock Dad had bought to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the business. I realized that clock might not make it to its 20th anniversary depending on how badly this crisis damaged our finances. I need time to think, Marcus said. You have until tomorrow morning, I replied. If you haven't agreed to the terms by then, I'm calling the police. The meeting broke up without anyone saying goodbye. Mom hugged Lisa and whispered something in her ear that I couldn't hear. Dad shook Marcus's hand, which struck me as oddly formal, until I realized it might be the last time they ever touched. Jennifer and I drove home in silence. Our own kids were at her mother's house for the night, which was probably for the best. How do you explain to a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old that their uncle is a criminal and their family is falling apart? Are you sure about this? Jennifer asked as we got ready for bed. No, I said honestly. I'm not sure about anything. But what's the alternative? Prison. Let the system handle it like it's supposed to. And destroy our family publicly. Have our name in the papers, our business associated with scandal. Marcus would go to jail, but we'd all pay the price. So instead you want to play judge and jury with your own brother? I didn't have a good answer for that either. Nothing about this situation had good answers. The next morning, Marcus called at exactly 9 o'clock. I'll do it, he said without preamble. You'll accept the terms. I'll accept exile. 10 years. I'll sign whatever papers you need to make it official. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that we wouldn't have to involve the police, that our family's shame would remain private. Sadness that it had come to this at all, that the brother I'd grown up with was about to vanish from my life. There's one more condition, I said. Something I didn't mention yesterday. What? You have to tell Amy and Kevin yourself. You have to explain to your children why Daddy is going away and won't be at Christmas anymore. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought he'd hung up. David, please, don't make me do that. They're just kids. Exactly. They're kids who deserve to know the truth instead of some fairy tale about Daddy going on a long business trip. You created this mess, Marcus. You get to clean it up, all of it. They'll hate me. Maybe. Or maybe they'll understand someday that actions have consequences, that stealing is wrong even when family members do it. Either way, it's not my decision to make. It's yours. He agreed, though I could hear him crying as he said the words. The next 2 weeks were a blur of lawyers and paperwork and the most awkward conversations of my life. We had to create legal documents that would remove Marcus from the business while protecting the rest of us from any potential liability. We had to figure out how to handle his departure without triggering questions from employees, suppliers, or customers. Lisa filed for divorce 3 days after our family meeting. She also filed for sole custody of the children, which Marcus didn't contest. I think by then he understood that his theft had cost him everything, not just money. The hardest part was watching him tell Amy and Kevin. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Lisa told me about it later, her voice hollow with exhaustion and grief. He tried to make it sound like an adventure, she said, like he was going away to start a new life, and they could visit him someday. But Kevin kept asking why. and Amy is old enough to know something terrible had happened. She asked if Daddy was in trouble, and he couldn't lie to her. He told her he'd made a very bad mistake and had to go away for a long time to make up for it. What did they say? Kevin didn't understand. He just cried and asked when Daddy was coming home. But Amy... Lisa shook her head. Amy looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. She asked if he was going to jail, and when he said no, she asked why not if he'd done something bad. 8 years old, and she already understands justice better than her father does. The day Marcus left San Francisco, I drove him to the airport. It was raining, which seemed fitting for such a miserable occasion. He had 2 suitcases and a one-way ticket to Denver, where he'd found a job managing a small electronics repair shop for a fraction of what he'd been making with us. "I know you'll never forgive me," he said as we sat in my car outside the terminal, "but I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know," I said. "That's what makes it so much worse." Will you look after Amy and Kevin? Make sure they know they're still part of the Chen family?" "Of course. They're innocent in all this." He nodded and opened the car door, then paused. "Do you think Dad will ever forgive me?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. Dad had been quiet in the weeks since our family meeting, going through the motions of daily life, but with a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before the heart attack. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think he's heartbroken more than angry. You were supposed to carry on what he and Grandpa built, and instead you nearly destroyed it. That's not the kind of thing a man gets over easily." Marcus nodded again and got out of the car. He didn't say goodbye, and neither did I. We both knew this wasn't really goodbye anyway. It was something much more final than that. I watched him walk into the terminal until he disappeared into the crowd, and then I drove home to begin the process of rebuilding everything he'd torn down. The first few months were brutal. We had to take out emergency loans to cover payroll and keep our suppliers happy. I had to let go 3 employees, including Sarah, which broke my heart because she'd been the one to discover the theft in the first place. She understood, but that didn't make it any easier. Dad came back to work part-time, against his doctor's advice because we needed his expertise to navigate the crisis. Mom picked up extra hours at the church rectory where she'd been volunteering, bringing in a small but steady paycheck that helped cover household expenses. The worst part was the lying. Every time someone asked about Marcus, where he was, why he wasn't returning calls, when he'd be back, I had to come up with believable excuses. He was exploring new business opportunities. He was taking time off for personal reasons. He was focusing on family matters. Only the immediate family knew the truth, and we'd all agreed to keep it that way. But lies have a way of multiplying, and I found myself creating an increasingly complex web of deception just to maintain the fiction that Marcus had left voluntarily. Lisa and the kids moved in with us temporarily, which helped with childcare but made the cramped quarters feel even more crowded. Amy had become withdrawn and sullen, barely speaking to anyone except to ask pointed questions about when her father was coming home. Kevin had started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was 3. "They need counseling," Jennifer told me one night after we'd finally gotten everyone to sleep. "Professional help to deal with what their father did to them." "We can't afford counseling right now," I said. "We can barely afford groceries." "Then we need to find a way to afford it, because those kids are falling apart." She was right, of course. The theft had cost us more than money. It had cost us the innocence and security that children deserve. Amy and Kevin were paying the price for their father's crimes, and there was nothing any of us could do to shelter them from that reality. 6 months after Marcus left, we got our first letter. It was addressed to me at the business, postmarked from Denver. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief note and a money order for $500. "David," the note read, "I know this isn't much, but it's all I can spare right now. I'm working 2 jobs and living in a studio apartment, trying to save every penny. I'll send more when I can. Tell Amy and Kevin I love them. $500 out of $1.5 million. At that rate, it would take him 300 years to pay us back, assuming he could maintain that pace indefinitely. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that he understood his debt, that he was at least trying to make amends." I showed the letter to Dad, who read it without comment and handed it back. "Are you going to respond?" he asked. "I don't know. The agreement was no contact for 10 years. The agreement was that he couldn't come back for 10 years. It didn't say anything about letters." That was true, though I wondered if allowing any contact at all would undermine the severity of his punishment. But the money order represented real sacrifice. $500 was probably a significant portion of his monthly income, given the job he'd found and the living expenses of starting over in a new city. I decided to deposit the money but not respond to the letter. Let him wonder if we'd received it, if we cared about his gesture at all. It seemed like a small additional punishment, and God knows he deserved every bit of discomfort we could inflict. The letters kept coming every month like clockwork. Sometimes they included money, never more than $500, sometimes as little as $50, when he wrote about unexpected expenses or medical bills. Sometimes they were just updates about his life, his work, his attempts to build something resembling a normal existence in Denver. After the first year, he started including separate notes for Amy and Kevin. These were harder to ignore because they weren't really addressed to me. They were messages from a father to his children, passed through me because I controlled access to them. "Should I give these to the kids?" I asked Lisa one evening, holding the latest batch of letters. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me thinks they deserve to know their father is thinking about them, but another part of me thinks it's cruel to maintain that connection when he can't actually be part of their lives." We decided to hold on to the letters without sharing them, at least until Amy and Kevin were old enough to decide for themselves whether they wanted contact with Marcus. It seemed like the safest choice, though I wondered if we were making the right decision. By the second year, the business had stabilized. We'd paid off the emergency loans, restocked our inventory, and even hired back one of the employees we'd had to let go. Dad's health had improved too. The daily routine of work seemed to energize him in a way that retirement hadn't. But the family dynamics remained fractured. Amy, now 10, had developed an intense dislike of discussing her father or anything related to him. When relatives or family friends asked about Marcus, she would get angry and change the subject. Kevin, on the other hand, had started creating elaborate fantasies about his father's secret life as a spy or explorer, adventures that would eventually bring him home to explain his long absence. Neither response is healthy, the family counselor we'd finally been able to afford told us. Amy is trying to erase her father from her emotional life, while Kevin is trying to transform him into a hero. Both strategies are ways of avoiding the painful reality that their father chose to leave them. "He didn't choose to leave them," I said. "He chose to steal from us. We chose to make him leave." From the children's perspective, that's a distinction without a difference. Their father is gone because of choices he made. The specific mechanism of his departure doesn't change the fundamental abandonment they're experiencing. The counselor recommended that we consider allowing some form of supervised contact between Marcus and his children, perhaps phone calls or video chats on birthdays and holidays. The idea made my stomach turn. "He stole from his own family," I said. "He gambled away money that was supposed to secure his children's future. Why should he get the comfort of talking to them?" "Because they're his children too, and they're suffering from the complete loss of that relationship. The punishment you've imposed on Marcus is also punishing Amy and Kevin, whether you intended it that way or not." But I wasn't ready to consider any modification of Marcus's exile. It had been less than 2 years. He had 8 more to go, and I intended to hold him to every day of it. He'd made his choice when he started stealing from us. Now he had to live with the consequences. The third year brought unexpected complications. Amy, now 11, had become an excellent student, but had also developed what the school counselor called authority issues. She questioned everything, challenged every rule, and seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out perceived hypocrisy in adults. "Why do we have to follow rules when grown-ups can just break them whenever they want?" she asked me one evening after I'd scolded her for staying out past curfew. "Adults have more experience making decisions," I said, giving her the standard parental response. "Like Daddy's decision to steal money? Was that good decision-making?" The question hit like a physical blow. At 11, Amy was already making connections that I'd hoped would take years for her to understand. "Your father made a very bad decision," I said carefully. "That's why he had to face consequences." "But you made the decision to send him away forever. What if that was a bad decision too? What if you're wrong about that?" I didn't have a good answer, and Amy knew it. She'd inherited her father's intelligence, but combined it with a moral clarity that Marcus had never possessed. It was both impressive and terrifying to watch. Kevin, meanwhile, had started asking more direct questions about when his father was coming home. His childish fantasies about spy missions and secret adventures had given way to a more mature understanding that something was seriously wrong with their family situation. "Tommy Chen's dad says Uncle Marcus is in jail," Kevin announced one day after school. Tommy was our cousin's son, and apparently family gossip was starting to leak beyond our immediate circle. "Uncle Marcus isn't in jail," Lisa said carefully. "He's living in another state. Why? Because sometimes adults have to move away for work." "For 3 years?" Lisa looked to me for help, but I was as lost as she was. The lies were becoming harder to maintain as the children got older and more perceptive. That night, Lisa and I had a serious conversation about whether to modify our approach. The children were clearly suffering from the uncertainty and half-truths, and their behavioral problems were getting worse rather than better. "Maybe we should consider what the counselor suggested," Lisa said. "Some kind of supervised contact with Marcus, phone calls maybe, or video chats." "Absolutely not. David, they're my children too, and I'm telling you they need some connection with their father. This complete cutoff is damaging them. He should have thought about that before he stole from us. He's not the only one being punished here. Amy and Kevin are serving his sentence right along with him." I knew she was right, but I couldn't bring myself to relent. Every month, Marcus's letters arrived with their small money orders and their updates about his mundane life in Denver. Every month, I deposited the money and filed the letters away without response. It had become a ritual, a way of maintaining control over a situation that had spiraled so far out of control. But the letters were starting to change. The early ones had been apologetic, filled with remorse and promises to make things right. The recent ones had taken on a different tone, not angry exactly, but more assertive, more demanding. "It's been 3 years," his latest letter read. "I've sent you almost $18,000, which I know isn't much compared to what I took, but it represents real sacrifice on my part. I'm living like a monk, David, eating ramen noodles and sleeping on a mattress on the floor, all so I can send you whatever I can spare. I think I've earned the right to at least talk to my children." $18,000. I'd been so focused on the monthly routine that I hadn't calculated the total. It was more than I'd expected, but still less than 2% of what he'd stolen. At this rate, full repayment would take 75 years. But the amount wasn't really the point anymore. The point was power. My power to control the terms of his punishment, to decide when and if he'd be allowed back into our lives. I'd become the arbiter of justice for our family, and the responsibility was starting to feel heavier than I'd anticipated. The breaking point came during Amy's 12th birthday party. We'd invited her friends from school, decorated the backyard, ordered her favorite cake. Everything was going perfectly until one of her friends asked about her father. "Where's your dad?" the girl asked innocently. "My mom says she used to know him from the electronics store." Amy's face went through a series of expressions: embarrassment, anger, and finally a cold determination that reminded me uncomfortably of Marcus in his worst moments. "My dad is dead," she said flatly. The party went silent. Lisa dropped the plate she was carrying. Kevin started crying. Though I wasn't sure if it was because of Amy's lie or because he understood the implications of what she'd said. "Amy," I said carefully, "that's not true." "Isn't it?" She turned to face me with eyes that looked far too old for a 12-year-old. "He's been gone for 3 years. He doesn't call, he doesn't visit, he doesn't exist in our lives at all. How is that different from being dead?" The other children were looking back and forth between us, sensing the adult drama but not understanding it. Their parents would ask questions later, and I'd have to come up with more lies to explain Amy's outburst. But in that moment, all I could think about was the accuracy of Amy's assessment. We had effectively killed Marcus as far as his children were concerned. We'd erased him from their daily lives so completely that claiming he was dead seemed almost reasonable. After the party, after the guests had gone home with their awkward goodbyes and confused looks, I sat down with Amy and Kevin to have the conversation I'd been avoiding for 3 years. "Your father isn't dead," I began, "but he did something very wrong, and as punishment he had to move away from our family." "What did he do?" Amy asked. I looked at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly. We'd agreed it was time for the truth, or at least an age-appropriate version of it. "He took money from the family business, money that didn't belong to him." "He stole?" Kevin's eyes went wide. "Yes, he stole a lot of money and lost it all gambling." Amy was quiet for a long time processing this information. Finally, she asked, "Is that why you sent him away?" "Yes." "For how long?" 10 years. "So he can come back when I'm 22 and Kevin is 16? The way she phrased it made the timeline sound both impossibly long and oddly specific. 10 years had seemed appropriate when Marcus was an abstract concept, a criminal who'd betrayed our family. But when measured against his children's development, Amy finishing high school and college, Kevin becoming a teenager, it suddenly seemed like an eternity. "That was the agreement," I said. "Did anyone ask us what we wanted?" Amy asked. "Did anyone consider how Kevin and I would feel about not seeing our father for 10 years? You were too young to understand." "I'm not too young now, and I understand that you decided to punish us along with him." The accusation stung because it was essentially true. We told ourselves that we were protecting the children, shielding them from a father who'd proven himself untrustworthy. But we'd also imposed our judgment about Marcus's fitness as a parent without considering what the children themselves might want. "What would you like to happen?" I asked. Amy thought about it seriously. "I'd like to talk to him on the phone or on video chat. I want to ask him why he did what he did, and I want him to explain himself." "And you, Kevin?" Kevin was crying again, but he managed to whisper, "I want to see Daddy." That night I called the counselor and scheduled an emergency session. Lisa and I needed professional guidance about how to handle this new development, how to modify the punishment we'd imposed without undermining its effectiveness. "The children are ready for some form of contact with their father," the counselor said after I'd explained the birthday party incident. "They've processed the basic facts of his betrayal, and now they need to begin working through their relationship with him as he actually is, not as the absent figure you've created." "But he betrayed the family. He can't just waltz back into their lives like nothing happened." "No one's suggesting that nothing happened, but complete estrangement isn't serving anyone's interest at this point. The children are old enough to have supervised contact with their father while still understanding that his actions had serious consequences." "What does supervised contact look like?" "Video calls on a regular schedule, maybe once a month to start. You or Lisa would be present to monitor the conversations and intervene if necessary. The children could ask their questions directly, and Marcus would have to answer them honestly." The idea terrified me. For 3 years, I'd maintained complete control over Marcus's punishment, over the narrative of what had happened and why. Allowing him direct access to Amy and Kevin, even supervised access, meant giving up some of that control. But the alternative was watching his children continue to suffer from the uncertainty and fantasies they'd created to fill the void where their father used to be. I agreed to consider it, which the counselor interpreted as progress. But privately, I was already planning ways to maintain as much control as possible over any potential contact. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I wrote back to Marcus. "Your children know the truth about what you did," I wrote. "They're struggling with your absence, and their counselor thinks supervised contact might be beneficial. If you're interested in video calls with Amy and Kevin, there will be strict conditions. You will answer their questions honestly. You will not make promises about the future that you can't keep. You will not try to turn them against the decisions we've made as a family. If you violate any of these conditions, contact will be terminated immediately." I mailed the letter before I could change my mind, then spent the rest of the week second-guessing the decision. Marcus's response came back faster than any of his previous letters, postmarked just 2 days after I'd sent mine. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in his familiar handwriting. "David," it read, "thank you. I know this couldn't have been an easy decision, and I'm grateful for any chance to talk to Amy and Kevin. I accept all your conditions without reservation. I understand that this is a privilege, not a right, and I won't do anything to jeopardize it. When would be convenient for the first call?" His gratitude felt genuine, but it also irritated me. I didn't want Marcus to be grateful. I wanted him to understand that this wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't the beginning of his return to the family. It was a minor modification to his punishment, designed to help his children heal. We scheduled the first video call for the following Sunday afternoon. Lisa, Amy, Kevin, and I gathered around our laptop in the living room, all of us nervous about seeing Marcus for the first time in 3 years. When his face appeared on screen, my first thought was how much he'd aged. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked thinner too, probably from the financial stress of sending us money every month while trying to survive on whatever was left. "Hi, Daddy," Kevin said immediately, his voice small and uncertain. "Hi, buddy." Marcus's voice cracked on the words. "You've gotten so big. You look like a real grown-up now." Amy was quieter, studying her father's face with the intensity she brought to everything these days. Finally, she spoke. "Why did you steal from Grandpa and Uncle David?" Marcus had clearly been expecting this question, but it still took him a moment to answer. "I made a very bad decision," he said. "I thought I could make a lot of money very quickly, and I convinced myself that I could put the money back before anyone noticed it was gone. But you couldn't put it back. No. I lost it all. And then I had to tell everyone what I'd done. Were you going to tell us, or were you just going to let us think you left because you didn't want to be our daddy anymore?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He looked at me for help, but I kept my expression neutral. This was his conversation to navigate. "I never stopped wanting to be your daddy," he said carefully. "I had to leave because of the consequences of what I'd done, not because I didn't love you." "But you chose to take the money," Amy pressed. "You knew it might mean leaving us, and you took it anyway." "I thought—" Marcus paused, clearly struggling with how to explain adult motivations to a 12-year-old. "I thought I was smarter than I actually was. I thought I could fix everything before anyone got hurt. But we did get hurt. Kevin cries about you all the time, and I had to lie to my friends and say you were dead because it was easier than explaining why you abandoned us." Marcus started crying then, and I felt an unwelcome surge of sympathy for him. Whatever else he'd done, he was still a father listening to his daughter explain how his actions had damaged her life. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever had to do." "You didn't have to do it," Amy said with 12-year-old logic. "You could have chosen not to steal in the first place." "You're right. You're absolutely right." Kevin had been quiet during this exchange, but now he leaned closer to the screen. "Are you coming home soon?" Marcus looked at me again, and this time I gave him a slight nod. The children deserved to know the timeline. "Not for a long time, buddy. I have to stay away for 10 years total, and it's only been 3 years so far." "7 more years?" Kevin's face crumpled. "But I'll be 13 then. You'll miss everything." "I know. I'm going to miss so much, and that's my fault. But maybe we can talk like this sometimes so I don't miss everything." "Can we?" Kevin turned to me hopefully. "Can we talk to Daddy again?" The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering Kevin's school, Amy's friends, Marcus's job in Denver, and the weather. Mundane topics that felt simultaneously normal and surreal given our circumstances. When we finally ended the call, both children seemed emotionally drained but somehow lighter than they'd been in months. "How do you feel?" Lisa asked Amy. "Sad," Amy said immediately, "but also, I don't know, less angry maybe? He seems different than I remembered." "Different how?" "Smaller, less important. When I was little, I thought Daddy was the smartest, strongest person in the world. Now he just seems like a regular person who made a really bad mistake." That assessment struck me as remarkably mature for a 12-year-old. Amy had managed to separate the father she'd idealized as a young child from the flawed human being she was now old enough to understand. Kevin's reaction was simpler, but no less significant. "I'm happy we got to talk to Daddy," he said. "Can we do it again next month?" We established a schedule. 1 video call per month, lasting no more than 30 minutes, with either Lisa or me present to supervise. The children could ask whatever questions they wanted, and Marcus had to answer honestly. If the conversations became inappropriate or harmful in any way, we would terminate the arrangement. Over the following months, these calls became a strange new ritual for our family. Marcus would appear on our laptop screen, looking slightly older and more tired each time, and his children would update him on their lives while he shared carefully edited highlights from his own. The conversations gradually became less emotionally charged and more routine. Amy stopped asking accusatory questions about the theft, though she continued to press Marcus for details about his daily life in Denver. Kevin shared school projects and soccer scores with the enthusiasm he'd once reserved for bedtime stories. But the calls also reinforced the distance between Marcus and his children. He was missing scout meetings and school plays, birthday parties and scraped knees. The mundane moments of parenthood that can't be captured in 30-minute video calls once a month. It's better than nothing, Lisa said after one of our sessions. But it's also a constant reminder of everything he's not here for. I agreed, though I was secretly pleased that Marcus was experiencing that reminder too. Every month, he got to see his children growing up without him, becoming people he didn't really know. It seemed like an appropriate additional punishment for what he'd done. The fourth year brought new complications. Amy started high school, and Kevin entered middle school. Both were experiencing the social pressures that come with adolescence, and both were dealing with the additional burden of having an absent father whose absence they couldn't fully explain to their peers. It's embarrassing, Amy told me one evening after a particularly difficult day at school. Everyone else's parents come to open house together, and I have to bring Uncle David and pretend that's normal. I'm honored to stand in for your father at school events, I said. That's not the point. The point is that my father should be here, and he's not. And it's weird and sad, and I'm tired of having to explain it. Amy had always been direct, but her frustration was becoming more pointed as she got older. She understood intellectually why Marcus had been exiled, but emotionally she was struggling with the practical consequences of that decision. Kevin was having different problems. He'd started acting out at school, getting into fights, and defying teachers. When I asked him about it, he gave me an answer that stopped me cold. Jake Morrison said his dad could beat up my dad, and I said my dad was stronger than his dad, and then Jake said my dad was a criminal who ran away from home, so I hit him. Kevin, you can't hit people just because they say things that upset you. But he was lying about Daddy. Daddy didn't run away. You made him leave. The distinction was important to Kevin, though it probably didn't matter to his classmates. Either way, his father wasn't there, and that absence was becoming a source of shame and anger that he didn't know how to process. During our next video call with Marcus, I brought up the children's struggles. Amy's feeling embarrassed about your absence, I told him, and Kevin got in a fight defending you at school. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: guilt, sadness, and something that might have been anger. What do you want me to do about it? He asked. I want you to understand that your actions are still causing problems for your children 4 years later. Trust me, I understand that. I live with it every day. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're living a quiet, peaceful life in Denver while your children are dealing with the social consequences of having a father who's a criminal. It was a cruel thing to say, and I knew it. But I was frustrated by the ongoing complications Marcus's theft had created for all of us. Every school event, every family gathering, every conversation about fathers required careful navigation around the truth. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was harder than I'd heard it in years. You want me to understand consequences. I'm living in a studio apartment with no furniture except a mattress and a folding chair. I work 2 jobs, one fixing computers during the day, another stocking shelves at night. I haven't bought new clothes in 2 years. I haven't eaten in a restaurant or seen a movie or done anything that normal people consider entertainment. Every penny I don't absolutely need for survival, I send to you, so don't tell me I don't understand consequences. Amy and Kevin were listening to this exchange with wide eyes. They'd never heard their father talk about his living conditions in such detail. Daddy, do you have a TV? Kevin asked. No, buddy, I can't afford one. What do you do when you get home from work? I read books from the library. I write letters to you and Amy. I think about how much I miss you. The conversation shifted after that, becoming less confrontational and more focused on the practical realities of Marcus's exile. But the damage was done. Both children now understood that their father was living in poverty, at least partially, because he was sending money to us every month. After the call ended, Amy turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Is it true that Daddy sends us money every month? Yes. Not very much, but yes. How much? Usually around $500, sometimes less. Amy was quiet while she did the math. That's $6,000 a year. Over 4 years, that's $24,000. Something like that. And you said he stole $1.5 million, so he's paid back about 2% of what he took. Her mathematical precision was unsettling. Yes, roughly. At this rate, it would take him 50 years to pay it all back. The money isn't really the point anymore, Amy. Then what is the point? What exactly are we accomplishing by keeping him in exile? I didn't have a good answer for that question. The punishment had made sense in the beginning, when the theft was fresh and the betrayal felt raw. But 4 years later, with Marcus clearly struggling, and his children suffering from his absence, the logic was less clear. The point is that actions have consequences, I said finally. Your father made a choice that hurt our entire family, and he has to live with the results of that choice. But we're living with the results too. Kevin gets in fights because kids make fun of his absent father. I lie to my friends because the truth is too complicated to explain. Mom cries sometimes when she thinks we're not looking. How is any of that justice? Amy had inherited her father's intelligence, but she'd also developed a moral clarity that Marcus had never possessed. At 14, she could see the flaws in our family's approach to justice more clearly than the adults who designed it. That night, Lisa and I had another serious conversation about the sustainability of Marcus's exile. Amy's right, Lisa said. We're all being punished for Marcus's crime. The kids are suffering. I'm struggling to raise them as a single parent, and even you and your parents are bearing the emotional cost of this estrangement. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to consider early parole. Absolutely not. He agreed to 10 years. It's been 4 years. He serves the full sentence. David, listen to yourself. You're talking about your brother like he's a prisoner in your private jail system. This isn't justice anymore. It's revenge. He stole $1.5 million from our family business. How is permanent exile revenge rather than justice? Because the punishment has to fit the crime, and at some point continued punishment stops serving justice and starts serving your anger. Lisa was probably right, but I couldn't admit it. I'd invested 4 years in the belief that Marcus's exile was the right response to his betrayal. Questioning that now would mean acknowledging that I might have caused unnecessary suffering to everyone involved, including the children I was supposedly protecting. The 5th year brought the crisis I'd been unconsciously dreading. Amy was 15 now, a sophomore in high school with strong opinions about everything. Kevin was 11, old enough to understand family dynamics, but young enough to still need his father in ways that video calls couldn't satisfy. During one of our monthly conversations with Marcus, Kevin asked the question that changed everything. Daddy, what if we came to visit you? Marcus looked startled. Visit me where? In Denver. What if Mom and Amy and I came to see where you live? Marcus glanced at me nervously. I don't think that's allowed, buddy. The rules say I have to stay away from the family. But we wouldn't be bringing you home. We'd be coming to see you. That's different, right? From the mouths of babes. Kevin had identified the logical flaw in our punishment system. We'd forbidden Marcus from returning to California, but we'd never explicitly forbidden his children from traveling to see him. I don't think that's a good idea, I said quickly. Why not? Amy jumped in. Kevin's right. The agreement was that Dad couldn't come back to California for 10 years. It didn't say anything about us visiting him. The spirit of the agreement. The spirit of the agreement was that Dad had to be separated from the family as punishment for what he did, Amy interrupted. But we're not the ones being punished. Why can't we see him if we want to? It was a fair point, and everyone in the room knew it. Lisa was nodding thoughtfully, clearly considering the possibility. Even Marcus looked hopeful for the first time in years. I'd love to see you, he told the children, but only if it's okay with your mom and Uncle David. All eyes turned to Lisa, who looked at me expectantly. The decision was being pushed to me again, the way it had been 5 years earlier when this whole mess started. I need to think about it, I said. But even as I said it, I knew I was running out of reasonable objections. The children were old enough to make their own decisions about their relationship with their father. Marcus had served half his sentence and had been making monthly payments without fail. The original justification for his exile, protecting the family from his criminal behavior, no longer seemed relevant. After the call ended, Amy confronted me directly. You don't want us to visit Dad because you're still angry at him, she said. This isn't about protecting us anymore. This is about your feelings. That's not true. Isn't it? Name one way that Kevin and I would be harmed by spending a weekend with our father in Denver? I couldn't think of one. Marcus wasn't dangerous. He'd never been physically abusive or emotionally manipulative. His crime had been financial, not personal. There was no reason to believe that supervised visits would harm his children in any way. But there was also no denying that Amy was right about my motivations. I was still angry at Marcus, still hurt by his betrayal, still invested in making him pay for what he'd done to our family. The children's desire to see their father threatened the control I maintained over his punishment. A visit to Denver would be expensive, I said, grasping for practical objections. We have money, Lisa pointed out. The business has recovered, and we've been saving for years. A weekend trip wouldn't break us financially. What if he tries to convince them to move to Denver permanently? What if he uses the visit to turn them against us? Then we deal with that if it happens. But we can't base our decisions on hypothetical fears. I was losing the argument, and everyone knew it. My objections were becoming more desperate and less logical. That night, I called Dad to get his perspective on the situation. The children want to visit Marcus in Denver, I told him. Lisa thinks we should allow it. Dad was quiet for a long time. At 77, he'd been dealing with some health problems again, and I sometimes worried that the stress of the past 5 years had accelerated his decline. What do you think we should do? He finally asked. I think we should stick to the original agreement. 10 years means 10 years. And what about Amy and Kevin? What do they want? They want to see their father, but they're children. They don't understand the bigger picture. Amy is 15. Kevin is 11. They're not babies anymore, David. They're old enough to have opinions about their own lives. So you think we should let them visit him? Another long pause. I think the time for absolute control is ending. Marcus made his choice 5 years ago, and he's been paying for it ever since. But his children shouldn't have to serve his entire sentence with him. He betrayed us, Dad. He stole from his own family. Yes, he did, and we've made him pay for that betrayal. But at what point does continued punishment become cruelty? It was essentially the same argument Lisa had made, but hearing it from Dad gave it more weight. Dad was the one who'd been most hurt by Marcus's theft. It was his life's work that had been jeopardized, his trust that had been most thoroughly violated. Are you saying you forgive him? I'm saying I'm tired, David. I'm 77 years old. I've had 2 heart attacks, and I don't want to spend whatever time I have left maintaining anger against my own son. That conversation forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding for 5 years. The possibility that our punishment of Marcus had become disproportionate to his crime. He'd stolen money, lost it gambling, and expressed genuine remorse. In response, we'd cut him off from his children, his extended family, his entire support system. The theft had been devastating, but it hadn't been violent. It hadn't been malicious in the sense that Marcus hadn't set out to hurt us. He'd been trying to make a big score that would benefit everyone, and it had backfired catastrophically. His crime was greed and stupidity, not malice. But I'd treated it like malice for 5 years, and in doing so, I'd probably caused more ongoing harm than Marcus's original theft had. The next morning, I made the decision I should have made months earlier. Okay, I told Lisa. The kids can visit Marcus in Denver. Lisa looked surprised. Really? What changed your mind? Dad's right. We can't hold Marcus's children hostage to his punishment forever. They deserve a relationship with their father, even if I'm not ready to forgive him. Amy's reaction was immediate and intense. She hugged me harder than she had in years, and for a moment she was 8 years old again instead of 15. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for letting us see Daddy. Kevin was more restrained, but I could see the relief in his eyes. He'd been carrying the weight of his father's absence for 5 years, and now he finally had something to hope for. We planned the trip for the following month. Lisa would take the children to Denver for a long weekend, staying in a hotel and allowing supervised visits with Marcus during the day. I would stay in California, partly to mind the business, but mostly because I wasn't ready to see my brother face to face. The night before they left, Amy came to my room to talk. Are you sure you don't want to come with us? She asked. I'm sure. Are you ever going to forgive Daddy? It was the question I'd been dreading, partly because I didn't have a good answer. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe someday, but not yet. That's okay. I think maybe forgiveness has to happen when you're ready, not when other people think you should be ready. At 15, Amy understood emotional complexity better than most adults. She'd inherited the best parts of both her parents, Marcus's intelligence and analytical ability, Lisa's emotional wisdom and moral clarity. What do you hope will happen during this visit? I asked. I hope I'll remember why I used to love Daddy so much, and I hope he'll remember what it feels like to be our father. The weekend of the visit was torture. For me. I kept myself busy with work, but I couldn't stop thinking about what was happening in Denver. Were the children happy to see Marcus? Was he overwhelming them with emotion and apologies? Were they bonding in ways that would make them want to move to Colorado permanently? Lisa called me Sunday evening as they were preparing to return home. How did it go? I asked. Complicated. Good, but complicated. What does that mean? It means the kids are happy they got to see their father, but they're also confronting the reality of who he is now versus who they remembered. When they got home Monday night, both children seemed emotionally drained but more settled than they'd been in years. How was Denver? I asked. Sad, Amy said immediately. Daddy lives in this tiny apartment with no furniture. He sleeps on a mattress on the floor and eats cereal for dinner because he can't afford real food. It made me understand why he sends us money every month. He's literally giving us everything he has. Did that change how you feel about him? It made me feel sorry for him, but also proud of him, I guess. Like he's trying to make things right even though it's hard. Kevin's assessment was simpler. I'm glad we went, but I'm also glad we came home. Daddy seemed really sad all the time. Over the following weeks, the children processed their visit in different ways. Amy seemed more at peace with the family situation, less angry about Marcus's absence, but also less interested in maintaining regular contact with him. Kevin, on the other hand, started asking when they could visit again. Maybe at Christmas, Lisa suggested, if everyone thinks that's a good idea. But Christmas brought unexpected complications. Dad suffered another heart attack in November, this one more serious than the previous episodes. He survived, but his recovery was slow, and the doctors warned us that his heart was badly damaged. During one of his hospital stays, he asked me to call Marcus. Call him yourself, I said. You have his phone number. I want you to call him. I want you to tell him that I'm sick and that I'd like to see him. Dad, you know that's not possible. The agreement. Forget the agreement. I'm 77 years old, David. I've had 3 heart attacks, and the doctors aren't optimistic about my long-term prospects. I want to see my son before I die. The rawness in his voice caught me off guard. For 5 years, Dad had supported Marcus's exile without complaint. But facing his own mortality had apparently changed his perspective. If I call him, if I tell him you're sick, he'll want to come home. And if he comes home, then the exile ends early. Is that such a terrible thing? Yes, it is. We agreed on 10 years for a reason. We agreed on 10 years when we thought we had unlimited time to work through this crisis. But time isn't unlimited, David. None of us knows how much we have left. That conversation haunted me for days. Dad was clearly declining, and his request to see Marcus was probably his way of trying to resolve the family rift before he died. But allowing Marcus to return early would undermine everything we tried to accomplish with his punishment. I compromised by agreeing to set up a video call between Dad and Marcus, the first direct contact they'd had since the day Marcus left for Denver. The call was heartbreaking to watch. Dad looked frail and tired in his hospital bed, while Marcus appeared shocked by how much his father had aged in 5 years. Ba, Marcus said, using the Mandarin word for father that he hadn't spoken in years. You look old, Dad finished with a weak smile. I look old and sick because that's what I am. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, son. I've always known that. They talked for 20 minutes about inconsequential things. The weather in Denver, Dad's medical treatment, the business. But underneath the surface conversation, there was a deeper dialogue happening. An attempt to bridge 5 years of separation and anger. Near the end of the call, Dad said something that surprised everyone in the room. I forgive you, Marcus. I want you to know that before anything else happens to me. I forgive you for what you did to our family. Marcus broke down crying, and for a moment he looked like the little boy Dad used to carry on his shoulders around the original electronics shop. I don't deserve forgiveness, Marcus whispered. Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve, Dad replied. It's about what I need to give. I need to forgive you so I can die in peace. After the call ended, Dad turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You heard what I said to your brother. I heard. Do you understand why I said it? I think so. Good, because I'm going to ask you to consider something that won't be easy for you. I already knew what he was going to ask, and I knew I wasn't ready to hear it. I want Marcus to come home for Christmas, Dad said. I want all my children and grandchildren together for what might be my last holiday. Dad, we can't just... Yes, we can. The exile was your decision, David, and it can be your decision to end it early. It was a family decision. We all agreed. We all agreed to support whatever you decided, but the actual choice was always yours, and it still is. The weight of that responsibility had never felt heavier. For 5 years, I'd been the arbiter of Marcus's punishment, the one who decided what justice looked like for our family. But justice for whom? Dad was dying and wanted to see his son. Amy and Kevin wanted their father back. Lisa was exhausted from single parenthood. Even Mom, who rarely expressed opinions about family conflicts, had been dropping hints about the benefits of reconciliation. The only person who still believed Marcus deserved continued punishment was me. I need time to think about it, I said. You don't have much time. Christmas is 4 weeks away, and if Marcus is going to make travel arrangements... I said I need to think about it. But even as I said it, I knew the decision had already been made. Dad was dying, and his last wish was to see his family whole again. How could I deny him that, especially when my resistance was based on principle rather than practical concerns? That night, I called Marcus directly for the first time in 5 years. David? He sounded shocked to hear my voice. Dad wants you to come home for Christmas. Silence on the other end of the line. Are you serious? He's dying, Marcus. The doctors don't think he has much time left, and he wants to see you before he goes. What about the agreement? What about the 10 years? Dad thinks 5 years is enough. He wants to forgive you in person. And what do you think? It was the question I'd been dreading because I didn't have a clean answer. I think I'm tired of being angry all the time. I think Dad deserves to see his son, and I think Amy and Kevin deserve to have their father at Christmas. But you don't forgive me. No, I don't forgive you. But maybe that's my problem to work through, not yours. David, don't. Don't thank me. Don't apologize again. Don't make this into something it's not. This is about Dad, not about you. You can come home for Christmas, but after the holidays, we need to figure out what the new arrangement looks like. What do you mean? I mean, the old agreement is broken. Dad's forgiveness changes everything, and we need to establish new terms for your relationship with the family. Marcus was quiet for a long time. What kind of new terms? I don't know yet. Something less than complete exile, but more than full reconciliation. We'll figure it out together. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside Dad's hospital and cried harder than I had since the day we'd discovered the theft. 5 years of anger and control and rigid justice were collapsing around me, and I wasn't sure what would be left when the dust settled. The next few weeks were a blur of preparations and complicated emotions. We had to tell Amy and Kevin that their father was coming home for Christmas, which led to reactions ranging from excitement to anxiety to disbelief. Is this permanent? Amy asked. Is Dad moving back to California? I don't know yet. We're working out the details. But the 10 years... Grandpa's condition changes things. Sometimes circumstances require us to modify our plans. Amy nodded thoughtfully. At 15, she understood that life rarely followed neat timelines or absolute rules. Kevin's reaction was simpler but more intense. He hugged me and said, "Thank you for letting Daddy come home for Christmas. This is the best present ever." His joy was infectious and heartbreaking at the same time. For 5 years, he'd been hoping for exactly this moment, and now it was finally happening. Mom's reaction surprised me the most. When I told her Marcus was coming home, she cried with relief. "I've been praying for this day," she said. "I know what Marcus did was wrong, but he's still my son, and I've missed him every single day for 5 years." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you needed to make this decision for yourself in your own time. If I'd pushed you, you might have dug in deeper." She was probably right. My stubbornness had always been my greatest strength and my greatest weakness, and in this case, it had prolonged everyone's suffering unnecessarily. Lisa's reaction was the most complex. She was happy that Amy and Kevin would have their father for Christmas, but she was also anxious about what Marcus's return might mean for their relationship. "Are you and Marcus going to get back together?" I asked her. "I don't know. A lot has changed in 5 years. I've changed. He's changed. The kids have changed. We'll have to see if there's anything left to build on." "Do you want there to be?" "Part of me does. He's the father of my children, and despite everything he did, I loved him for a long time. But part of me is also scared that he'll hurt us again. Maybe not financially, but emotionally. What would you need from him to feel safe about reconciliation? Honesty. Complete transparency about his finances, his decisions, his plans, and time. Lots of time to rebuild trust." The day before Marcus's arrival, Dad was discharged from the hospital so he could be home for Christmas. He was weak and needed oxygen assistance, but his spirits were higher than they'd been in months. "Are you nervous about seeing Marcus tomorrow?" I asked him. "Nervous? No, grateful. I wasn't sure I'd live long enough to see my family whole again." "We're not whole yet, Dad. This is just a visit, not a full reconciliation." "Every journey begins with a single step," he said in Mandarin, one of his favorite proverbs. Marcus's flight arrived at SFO at 2:30 p.m. on December 23rd. I picked him up alone, partly because I wanted to have a private conversation before he saw the rest of the family. He looked better than he had during our video calls, healthier, less gaunt, though still obviously struggling financially based on his worn clothes and single small suitcase. "Thank you," he said as we walked to my car, "for this opportunity. Don't thank me yet, this is going to be complicated for everyone. I know, but even complicated is better than the complete separation we've had for 5 years. The drive home was awkward, filled with the weight of 5 years of unspoken conversations." Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "How angry are you on a scale of 1 to 10? "Honestly, about a 7. I'm not as furious as I was 5 years ago, but I'm not close to forgiveness either." "That's fair. What would it take to get down to, say, a 5? "Time. Proof that you've actually changed. Evidence that you understand the full scope of what you did to this family." "And to get down to a 1? I thought about that seriously. I don't know, maybe nothing. Maybe some things can't be completely forgiven." Marcus nodded. "I can live with that as long as you can live with me being part of the family again in some capacity." When we pulled into my parents' driveway, the front door opened immediately. Amy and Kevin ran out, followed by Lisa and Mom. Dad appeared in the doorway, leaning on his walker, but smiling more broadly than I'd seen in years. The reunion was everything you'd expect: tears, hugs, overwhelming emotions from everyone involved. Kevin attached himself to Marcus like a barnacle, unwilling to let go of his father even for a moment. Amy was more reserved, but clearly happy, studying Marcus's face like she was memorizing it. Lisa's hug with Marcus lasted longer than I'd expected, and I saw her whisper something in his ear that made him nod seriously. But it was Dad's reaction that affected me the most. When Marcus approached him, Dad struggled to his feet without the walker and embraced his son with more strength than I'd thought he still possessed. "Bah, I'm sorry," Marcus said, crying again. "I know, son, I know. Welcome home." That night, we had the first family dinner we'd shared in 5 years. Mom had cooked all of Marcus's favorite dishes, and the conversation flowed more naturally than I'd expected. Amy and Kevin bombarded their father with questions about Denver, his work, his apartment. Marcus answered everything honestly, including the uncomfortable questions about his financial situation. "Are you poor, Daddy?" Kevin asked with the bluntness that only children can manage. "Yes, buddy, I'm pretty poor right now." "Because you send us money every month?" "Partly because of that, and partly because I'm still paying for the mistakes I made." "Will you always be poor?" "I hope not." "I'm working hard to build a better life, but it takes time." After dinner, Marcus asked to speak with me privately. We went out to the backyard, the same place where we used to play catch as kids. "I need you to know something," he said. "The money I've been sending you. I want to keep doing that even if we work out some kind of reconciliation. It's not about the debt anymore. It's about showing you that I'm serious about making amends. Marcus, you've been living in poverty for 5 years to send us money we don't really need anymore. The business recovered. We're not in financial distress. But I am. I'm in debt to you and I need to pay it back. It's the only way I can live with myself. At the rate you're going, it would take 75 years to pay back what you stole. Then I'll pay for 75 years, or until I die, whichever comes first." His determination was simultaneously admirable and heartbreaking. He turned his life into a permanent act of penance, and I wasn't sure that was healthy for anyone involved. "What if we worked out a different arrangement?" I suggested. "Something that allows you to have a decent standard of living while still making symbolic payments?" "Like what?" "I don't know yet. Maybe you could work for the business again, at a reduced salary, with part of your pay going toward the debt. Or maybe you could move back to California and contribute to the family in other ways, helping with Dad's care, spending time with Amy and Kevin." Marcus looked stunned. "You'd consider letting me work for the business again?" "I'd consider it. With conditions. Full transparency about your finances. No access to company accounts without oversight. Probably a probationary period where your employment could be terminated at any time." "I'd accept all of that." And you'd have to understand that this wouldn't be the same as before. You wouldn't be a partner, you'd be an employee and not necessarily a permanent one. I understand. We talked for another hour, sketching out the broad outlines of what a modified relationship might look like. Marcus could return to California, but would need to find his own housing initially. He could see Amy and Kevin regularly, but would need to rebuild his relationship with Lisa slowly. He could work for the family business, but in a subordinate role with limited responsibilities. It wasn't the complete reconciliation that part of me had always hoped for, but it wasn't the permanent exile I'd insisted on either. It was something in between. A chance for Marcus to earn his way back into the family through consistent good behavior over time. Christmas morning was surreal. For the first time in 5 years, all of Dad's children and grandchildren were together. Amy and Kevin tore through their presents with the enthusiasm they had had as younger children, but their real joy came from having their father there to witness it. Marcus had brought small gifts for everyone, nothing expensive, but thoughtful items that showed he'd been paying attention to our lives, despite the distance. A book for Amy about a subject she'd mentioned during one of their video calls. A model airplane kit for Kevin. A silk scarf for Mom in her favorite color. For me, he'd brought something unexpected. A framed photo of the original electronics shop. The one Grandpa had started in 1967. I hadn't seen this picture in years, and had no idea where Marcus had found it. I got it from Mrs. Wong, he explained, referring to one of our old neighbors. She had it in a box of photos from the old days. I thought you should have it. The gesture was simple but meaningful. It showed that despite everything that had happened between us, Marcus still understood what the family business meant to me, what Grandpa's legacy represented. Thank you, I said, and for the first time in 5 years I meant it. Dad spent most of Christmas Day in his recliner, too weak to participate fully in the festivities, but clearly content to watch his family together again. Near the end of the day, he asked everyone to gather in the living room. I want to say something while I still can, he began, his voice weak but clear. 5 years ago, our family was torn apart by betrayal and anger. Marcus made a terrible mistake, and we all paid the price for it. He paused to catch his breath, and Mom adjusted his oxygen mask. But families aren't destroyed by single mistakes, no matter how serious. Families are destroyed by the inability to forgive, by the refusal to find a path forward together. He looked directly at me. David, you've carried the burden of justice for this family for 5 years. You've made the hard decisions that needed to be made. But now I'm asking you to make one more decision, the decision to let healing begin. Dad, I'm not asking you to forget what happened or to pretend it doesn't matter. I'm asking you to choose love over justice, family over principle. Because when I'm gone, you'll be the head of this family, and that means you'll be responsible for keeping it together or letting it fall apart. The room was completely silent except for the soft hiss of Dad's oxygen machine. Everyone was looking at me, waiting to see how I'd respond to what amounted to a dying man's final request. I've already made that decision, I said quietly. Marcus is coming home. We're going to work out a way for him to be part of this family again. Dad smiled, the first truly peaceful expression I'd seen on his face since his heart attack. Good, he whispered. That's good. Dad died 6 weeks later, on February 8th, 2026. His funeral was the largest gathering our family had seen in decades. Customers, suppliers, employees past and present, neighbors from the old days. Marcus stood with the rest of us as pallbearers, carrying the man who'd given us all our start in life. During the reception after the service, I found myself standing with Marcus in front of a display of photos from Dad's life. There were pictures of him as a young immigrant working in Grandpa's shop, pictures of him with Mom on their wedding day, pictures of Marcus and me as children, helping in the store, learning the business that would define our lives. He was a good man, Marcus said quietly. Yes, he was. And he deserved better than what I put him through. Maybe, but he also got what he wanted in the end, his family back together. Marcus nodded. What happens now? Now we figure out how to move forward, together. It's been 6 months since Dad's funeral, and the process of reintegrating Marcus into our family has been exactly as complicated as I'd expected. He moved back to California and found a small apartment in Daly City. He started working for the business again, initially just part-time doing repairs and inventory management, but gradually taking on more responsibilities as he proved himself trustworthy. Amy and Kevin have adjusted to having their father back in their lives, though the relationship isn't the same as it would have been if he'd never left. Amy, now 16, treats Marcus more like a friend than a parent, someone she enjoys spending time with but doesn't depend on for guidance. Kevin, at 12, is more willing to accept Marcus's parental authority, but he's also more independent than he would have been 5 years ago. Lisa and Marcus are taking things very slowly. They're not living together and they're not officially reconciled, but they're dating again in the careful way that people do when they're trying to rebuild something that was badly broken. Lisa says she's willing to consider remarriage someday, but only after Marcus has proven over years, not months, that he's genuinely changed. As for me, I'm still working on forgiveness. Some days I look at Marcus and remember the brother who taught me to play chess and helped me with my college applications. Other days I look at him and remember the thief who nearly destroyed everything our family had built. But I'm learning that forgiveness isn't a destination. It's a daily choice, a decision to prioritize the future over the past. Marcus will never be able to undo what he did 5 years ago. The money is gone forever, and the trust we lost can never be fully restored. But he can build something new, something different, and so can the rest of us. The business is thriving again, more successful than it's ever been. We've opened a 5th location and we're exploring opportunities in renewable energy technology. Marcus has contributed good ideas to our expansion, though he's careful never to push too hard or assume he has the same influence he once did. More importantly, our family is healing. Amy and Kevin are happy, stable, doing well in school. Mom has regained the energy she lost during the worst years of our crisis. Lisa smiles more than she has in a long time. Even I sleep better at night, no longer carrying the weight of maintaining Marcus's punishment. The letters still come every month, but now they're different. Instead of desperate apologies and small money orders, they're updates about Marcus's life in California, his work with the business, his hopes for the future. Sometimes he includes photos, his new apartment, a dinner he cooked, a sunset from Ocean Beach. The money orders continue too, though at a reduced amount now that Marcus is working for us again. $200 a month instead of $500, still a sacrifice, but no longer a crushing burden that keeps him in poverty. At this rate, he'll finish paying off his debt in about 40 years when he's 75 years old. I used to think justice meant making Marcus pay for exactly what he'd taken, dollar for dollar, with interest compounded over time. But I've learned that real justice isn't mathematical, it's restorative. It's about finding a way for everyone involved to move forward with dignity and hope. Marcus destroyed something 5 years ago, something that can never be rebuilt exactly as it was. But in its place, we've built something different, a family that understands the fragility of trust, the importance of consequences, and the power of redemption earned through persistent effort over time. I still don't know if what we did to Marcus was right. The exile might have been too harsh, or not harsh enough, or simply the wrong approach entirely. But I know that holding on to anger and demanding perfect justice would have destroyed more than Marcus's original crime ever could have. 3 weeks ago, Amy asked me something that I'm still thinking about. Do you think Daddy is a good person or a bad person? I think he's a person who did a very bad thing and is trying to make up for it, I said. Most people aren't simply good or bad. They're complicated. Are you glad he's back? Yes, I think I am. Even though he hurt us? Especially because he hurt us, because it means we figured out how to heal from something that could have destroyed us forever. Amy nodded, satisfied with that answer in the way that teenagers rarely are with adult explanations. That conversation made me realize something important. The story of what happened to our family isn't really about Marcus's theft or his punishment or even his return. It's about the choice we made to stay together despite being torn apart, to find a way forward that honored both justice and mercy. My brother robbed $1.5 million from our family business, and what we did to punish him nearly destroyed us all. But in the end, what saved us wasn't perfect justice or complete forgiveness. It was the decision to keep trying, day after day, to be a family worth saving. The money is gone forever. The trust will take decades to rebuild completely. But we're still here, still working together, still believing that love is stronger than betrayal and that redemption is possible for anyone willing to do the work. That's not the ending I'd planned 5 years ago, but it's the ending we earned. And maybe that's what family really means. Not the absence of betrayal, but the presence of grace when betrayal happens. Not the guarantee that we'll never hurt each other, but the promise that we'll keep trying to heal when we do. Marcus is my brother. He always was, and he always will be, no matter what he's done or what consequences he's faced. The business will survive, the money will be forgotten, but family, real family, chosen and fought for and forgiven into existence, lasts forever. I'm finally at peace with that, and maybe someday I'll even be grateful for the lesson.